Welcome to Money Control. I'm at India Energy Week, and joining me right now is Joseph McMonagle. He is the Secretary General of the International Energy Forum, and we are glad that he's joining us. We're going through a very interesting time right now in terms of the global energy markets. I give us some perspective on how you see the volatility panning out in the energy prices. It's really been anybody's guess which way it will head. But do you think the volatility that we saw in 2022 may not continue in 2023?
Well, I think the message about 2023, we're just into the second month, but I think we're seeing a lot of uncertainty about this year, and it's mostly on the demand side because we still have a lot of discussion about the global economy going into recession and narrative about economic gloom, which of course will weigh on energy demand. And then you have the whole issue of what's going on in China post zero COVID. Is it really a comeback? And by the way, on China, we think it is. We in the November data that we keep at the IAF, they had already exceeded demand in November compared to post COVID, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic levels. And that's before the zero COVID policy is revised. So we think it's real, but we'll have to wait and see. And then, of course, on the supply side, there's a lot of still uncertainty about Russian supplies. Really, crude hasn't been impacted that much. Maybe 500,000 barrels have come off the market. Most of it has been rerouted, different trade routes, right? But on the product side, which is just the newest sanctions that the EU put in place that went into effect this month, that's where we could start to see some more impact on prices, particularly on diesel and jet fuel and even gasoline, just because the feedstocks the Russian feedstocks are used for product. And unfortunately, the timing of all that could be the summer when that's really the high demand season. So the uncertainty is still there. I would say on the supply side, I say there's not a lot of uncertainty because basically what we've seen is a period of underinvestment, which is really underinvestment in hydrocarbons, which is really the cause of the energy crisis. A lot of people have, pinned the blame on the war in Ukraine for high energy prices. And I get politically it's easy to do that, but I think that would be the wrong lesson to learn. Really, the energy crisis started before the war in Ukraine. Remember, in the winter of 2021, that's when natural gas prices skyrocketed and continue to get worse. Certainly, the war in Ukraine has added an additional premium to prices and volatility, but it's not the root cause. And I think we have to learn that lesson. And still, that is going to be impacting us in 2023, 2024, and 2025. Because if we don't start investing in hydrocarbon production and exploration, I am afraid that high prices and volatility will be the new normal. And nobody wants that. It's not good for the global economy. It's not good if you care about the energy transition and climate change, because if the public starts to connect high prices and volatility with climate policies, we're in trouble. We'll lose public support for climate policy. So I don't want to see that happen either. So we have to be careful about the transition, and that's what we do at the IF and sort of urge countries. And we'll be having a dialogue with other ministers here to talk about these issues.
You have been talking to countries across the world. You're talking to a lot of ministers at India Energy Week. But help me understand. I mean, are we in a situation where everybody is looking out for themselves? Because it really is a situation where energy security is what matters right now. We are going, for example, I mean, there were questions raised about India buying discounted crude from Russia, but at the end of the day, we are looking out for energy security for the country. So have we reached a space where there's no consensus among countries on what is the big picture here, and are we working in isolation on just reaching individual energy security goals?
Well, I think there's good news and bad news on this run. I think the good news is that energy security, that terminology, is now back in vogue. The energy crisis has forced countries to really be aware of energy security and this topic we were just discussing, investment in hydrocarbons. The bad news is, and I made this point in my discussions in the roundtable with Prime Minister Modi and the minister, energy security is not a zero-sum game. It can't be bought at the expense of others. It's, especially hydrocarbon markets are global markets. You can't, cut production in one area or try to impact production in one area and for it to not affect the rest of the world. And we saw the crisis in Europe with natural gas and them, cutting off supplies from Russia, and prices rose. So they were able to attract LNG to Europe because the prices were higher, but that impacted other parts of the world. I mean, Pakistan was priced out of a tender. Other countries have tenders that couldn't find a single seller of LNG because prices. Europe is just pricing other parts of the world out of the market. So, I think the lesson on energy security is it's important for the global economy. It's important for climate change because it'll help us on high prices and volatility, and it'll also help us, for making sure we continue to make progress on climate change and the transition.
You mentioned earlier how important it is to invest on hydrocarbons, and this is something the Prime Minister of India has also highlighted, that we are going to push investments in hydrocarbons. Now, globally, hydrocarbons and fossil fuel is generally losing the favor that it used to get from the banking community, from the financing community. So how do we plug the gap there? I mean, how do we ensure that the finances that are required on that front make it, because the growth is required right now?
Yeah, this is the key issue, and it may seem odd again for the head of an international energy organization talking about investment in hydrocarbons, but the situation is so bad. It was exacerbated by COVID because the uncertainty with COVID, everybody sort of cut CapEx investment because there was so much uncertainty. But it's really important that we get it back. It had been slowing pre-COVID because of all the sustainability issues and ESG pressures. But I think as I go to conferences now, even in Davos, where you could claim the elites are, there's starting to be a recognition that we have to worry about investment in hydrocarbons because of the global economy and because we want to keep investments in government actions and policies on the transition. So we're doing an investment report next week. We'll be releasing it. We've done one every year for the last 3 years, and it basically quantifies the reductions in investment by companies. We talk about how much it has to be in order to meet demand. We estimate it's probably about $640 billion per year over the next 10 years just to meet demand while we pursue the energy transition. Last year was the first year that CapEx investment rose, but it's not necessarily translating in new drilling wells. It's also because inflation and costs rose as well. And so that's not the kind of increase in investment you want. You want real investment and real production. And so we're sounding the alarm bell. We've been doing this for the last 3 years. We're going to keep doing it. India gets it. So I think from India's perspective, it's good both for India, but also because India is hosting the G20, it's really important that they get it, and this becomes a key message in the G20 proceedings.
In the energy market, again, a lot is pegged around China, whether it is the demand from China affecting the crude prices, or in the clean energy space, where they are still the biggest manufacturers of all the equipment that is used in the industry. Given that, and of course, China plus one is a concept we have been talking about, what is your take on it? I mean, do you see a China plus one system working? Who could be that plus one? Or is it going to be a more broad-based growth that is required from multiple countries pooling in?
Well, I think the Asia region, even if you take China out of the picture, if you look at Southeast Asia, it's really, and of course India, it's really the growth engine of energy demand of the future. And this is why we need to be investing in these energy supplies. The population is growing. Even if you look at Africa, Africa grows every 2 years the size of a country like France or Thailand. They want to be, they want to have energy affordability and access for their citizens. But Heathrow Airport in London consumes more energy than the entire country of Sierra Leone in Africa. So there's an imbalance here, and the West doesn't really get it. And I think this is also a story for Asia too. The West doesn't really get the growth and development happening here, and the demand growth that will be happening, and what we need to do to address it, both to meet the demand and also to make sure we stay on the track to meet our climate goals.
2022, a lot of people in the energy space have had sleepless nights. 2023, I want to ask you, what would be the one big challenge for people who are in the energy space, whether these are the producers or consumers? What would be the one thing that everybody is watching out for?
Well, I think we talked about it. It's the demand uncertainty and what happens there, but it's also what happens on this supply picture. And it's not, I hear a lot of oil company CEOs talk about cycles and boom and bust cycles, and they've seen it before, and they know the cure to high prices is high prices. Well, I don't think that's true anymore. We've made structural changes to reduce supply. And unless we come to terms with that and realize we've done it and make changes to it, as I said, we're going to be in the situation where high prices and volatility will be the new normal, and it's not good for the global economy. It's not good for emerging markets in the developed world.
Before we wrap up, I have to ask you, you have been interacting very closely with the Indian government and ministries here. When you look at our plans, when you look at India's plans in the energy space, I mean, for example, we have struggled to increase our domestic output, but there is definitely a focus on that. What advice would you have for them to kind of move towards energy security?
Well, I think they're doing all the right things, and they're putting in the proper incentives. They're someone said at the session we were at today, energy investment is like water. It rises if it's least resisted. So you don't want to put a lot of regulations and capital in place. But I think on the supply side, I think they're doing the right thing. I think the thing I'm most excited about is what's happening on energy technology side. And, really, I think the next Googles of the future are going to be in the energy technology space. And here we are in Bengaluru. It's, there's so much innovation and investment going on here in technology. I think India could really be a leader in this energy technology space and providing solutions to the climate problem. So if I'm India, I'm going to focus more on that, on the technology side, because we have a lot of wind and solar will only get us about halfway to meeting our climate goals. The key to solving the climate issue is technology and alternatives to hydrocarbons that don't yet exist. And I think India has a huge role to play here.
Very interestingly put. I mean, the key, of course, is technology. Your first time in India, I hope you get some time to see India other than the conference. Thank you so much for joining us.
So nice to meet
Thank
you.
you.